They said the upstairs guest room was already being used. You can sleep out in the detached garage, Grandma Vanessa said without even looking up from her phone. I didn't argue. I just nodded once and carried my bag back toward the side door. Later that night, sitting on a narrow folding cot, between paint buckets and an old lawn mower, I realized this hadn't started with the garage. The garage was just the first time none of them bothered pretending anymore. Cold crept through the concrete floor before midnight. There was no real heat out there. Just a thin blanket and the old blue rose quilt I'd sewn decades ago when David was still alive and the house still felt like something steady. I pulled the quilt tighter around my shoulders, trying to ease the ache in my hands. My breath drifted pale through the dark air. Inside the house, laughter rolled out from the living room. Glasses clinked. Ethan's voice carried through the walls, sharper after a few drinks. Vanessa laughed louder than usual, the way she always did around guests. Someone important must have been staying over. Important enough to take the room that used to be mine. My name is Sandra Mitchell. I was 58 years old the night my daughter-in-law sent me to sleep in the detached garage behind the house I helped pay for. I didn't ask who. By then, I'd gotten used to pretending certain things didn't hurt. The cot pressed hard against my hip every time I shifted. The garage smelled like motor oil, dust, and damp cardboard. I closed my eyes and thought about David. 18 years gone, and somehow I still reached for him in moments like that without meaning to. You never would let this happen, I whispered. The metal shelves swallowed the words whole. Before dawn, I opened the side door quietly and stepped into the freezing air. The sky was still dark. Stars hung overhead, distant and sharp. I carried one small bag down the driveway without looking back. I already knew every crack in the brick, every porch light, every window I'd helped pay for. Nearly half that house existed because of me. That was the part that finally settled heavily in my chest as I walked away. Not just that they put me in the garage, but that somewhere along the way, I had slowly disappeared inside a home I helped build. The bus station sat about 20 minutes away on foot. My knees hated the cold, so I moved carefully, one slow step at a time. At the corner, a neighbor's dog barked once before falling silent again. Somewhere nearby, a porch light flicked on. Nobody came outside. At the station, I bought a ticket for the first bus leaving town. Didn't matter where it went. The woman behind the counter looked at me. For a second longer than necessary. No winter coat, no scarf, just my cardigan over a heavy sweater and one overnight bag. You all right, Ma'am? She asked gently. I thought about the garage, about the folding cot, about hearing my family laugh on the other side of the wall, while I tried to stay warm enough to sleep. I am leaving before somebody decides the garage should become permanent, I said. She didn't smile. Didn't ask questions either. She just handed me the ticket. On the bus, I sat by the window and watched the town drift slowly behind me. The bakery where I used to buy cinnamon rolls for Ethan before school. The library where I spent almost 20 years helping children learn how to read. The little park where I once pushed his stroller, then years later sat on the bleachers watching Saturday soccer games beneath bright morning skies. Places where I used to feel visible. By sunrise, I was nearly 50 miles away. A roadside diner off the highway gave me weak coffee and warm pancakes. I sat alone in the booth, rubbing feeling back into my hands, while truck engines rumbled outside in the parking lot. For the first time in years, nobody needed anything from me. That realization felt unfamiliar enough to hurt a little. I pulled a napkin from the dispenser and borrowed a pen from the waitress. Then I started making a list. Names, accounts, things I should be looked at much sooner, assets, everything that still legally belonged to me. The house, my savings, The emergency trust David and I had built together years ago. I had given Ethan far too much access to my life. That was about to stop. My phone buzzed somewhere inside my purse, but I ignored it. I wasn't ready to read the messages yet. Let them come home to an empty house. Let them sit with the silence for a while and wonder what it meant. It wasn't revenge. Not really. It felt more like finally setting something down after carrying it too long. When I first moved into Ethan and Vanessa's house 2.5 years earlier, I told myself it would only be temporary. I slipped on the back steps during winter and fractured my wrist, badly enough to need a cast almost to my elbow. Just a few weeks, I promised. Until I can cook and drive again. Vanessa smiled politely, all teeth and no warmth. Of course, she said, like she was doing charity work. Ethan barely looked up from his laptop, but weeks slowly turned into months. Then months became something quieter. Nobody discussed me leaving anymore. But nobody invited me to stay either. I simply became part of the background. Easy to overlook. Easy to move around. I learned the rhythm of the house quickly. When not to walk into the kitchen. When not to touch the thermostat. When to disappear into the upstairs guest room and stay there. They called it a guest room, though the mattress sagged in the center, and the door didn't even lock. The dresser smelled faintly of cedar and old dust. I only unpacked the essentials. A few changes of clothes. A framed photo of David. My knitting basket. I kept telling myself not to get too comfortable. Vanessa liked everything controlled a certain way. Shoes lined neatly by the door. No perfume. No television during dinner. It's not personal, she'd say whenever she moved my things somewhere else. I just like the house organized. One morning I found my teacups packed into a cardboard box beside the basement stairs. Too much clutter, she explained. I didn't argue. Ethan used to be different when he was young. After school, he'd curl against me on the couch with his head tucked beneath my chin. You smell like cookies, he used to say. Somewhere along the way, he stopped looking at me like his mother and started looking at me like something fragile that took up space. Maybe it happened after I sold the old house David built with his own hands and handed most of the money over to help with their mortgage. It's only fair, Ethan had told me back then, almost cheerful. You'll be living here too. It's your home. That was probably the last time I truly believed him. I didn't complain when they moved me out of my room twice for guests. I didn't complain when they forgot my birthday, or when Vanessa asked me to stay quiet during Zoom meetings, or when they planned the Scottsdale trip without me because flights are hard at your age. I adapted. Little by little, I learned how to make myself smaller inside their lives. I cooked when nobody was home, cleaned quietly, stayed out of the way whenever company came over. Sometimes they remembered to include me in family photos. Sometimes they cropped me back out afterward. 3 days later, the casserole was still sitting, untouched behind cartons of takeout. They harden. What starts as discomfort slowly becomes something sharp enough to cut through denial. It was Vanessa's voice that woke me that night. Tight. Irritated. Ethan. I already told you the guest room's taken. Then, a second later, your mom can sleep in the detached garage. No whispering. No embarrassment. No pause afterward like she regretted saying it. They spoke openly, like I was either asleep, deaf, or too old to care anymore. I stayed still in the bed that somehow never really felt like mine. The porch light glowed faintly through the curtains. Somewhere down the hallway, somebody laughed. The garage. I sat up slowly, folded my blue rose quilt, and packed a small bag. Socks, toothbrush, my arthritis medication. I moved calmly, not dramatically. More like someone quietly finishing something they'd already decided to leave behind. When I passed Ethan and Vanessa's bedroom, the door was closed. I didn't knock. I didn't hesitate either. I left the quilt folded on the cot in the garage. That was 3 days ago. Now I was sitting inside a quiet corner of the Maplewood Community Library, rereading the list I'd started at the diner. It had grown longer. Under every item, I'd added questions. Mitchell family joint account. How many automatic payments are covering their utilities? Mortgage refinance. Was my name still attached after 2023? Mitchell emergency savings. How much had been withdrawn without me really noticing? The more I wrote, the clearer everything became. It had started as cruelty. That was the unsettling part. At first it was convenience. Small practical decisions. Tiny adjustments nobody bothered to question. Just enough to slowly remove me from every part of the family except the financial one. I was visible when they needed help. Invisible when I needed consideration. I folded the paper carefully and slipped it back into my purse. Then I walked out of the library carrying something I hadn't felt in years. Direction. I wasn't going back. At least not as the version of me they were used to. Looking back now, I think it started with the thermostat. That first winter, I used to wake up around 6 in the morning to make tea, and warm my hands near the stove before the arthritis stiffened my fingers completely. One morning I turned the heat up to 72. By 8 o'clock, it was back down to 65. Energy bills are ridiculous lately, Vanessa said, with a bright little smile that never reached her eyes. We're trying to keep it lower. Hope that's okay. So I started wearing 2 sweaters inside the house. Fingerless gloves too. I drank lukewarm tea and told myself I'd survived worse things. Then came the television. Could you turn that down a little? Ethan asked one afternoon, while I was watching a documentary in the den. Ivy got a work call soon. His office was 3 rooms away. After that, the remote quietly disappeared. I switched to watching shows on my tablet with headphones. No one directly told me not to bake anymore, but little things began disappearing from the pantry. First flour. Then sugar. One afternoon the oven knob suddenly jammed, and somehow stayed broken for weeks. Vanessa barely looked up when I mentioned it. It's probably just old, she said. We've been meaning to replace it anyway. Most nights they ordered takeout instead. There were rules in that house, though nobody ever called them rules. Shoes off at the door. No perfume. Dante touched the smart speaker. And the kitchen belonged to Vanessa. Despite the fact she hardly cooked in it, I started making my meals quietly during the day, and washing every dish before they got home. One evening, I made tuna casserole, the kind Ethan loved when he was young. I set the table. Waited at 7, they walked in carrying pizza boxes. Vanessa stopped when she saw the casserole dish. Oh, she said lightly. Sorry. Ethan wanted Thai food, and I really didn't feel like cooking tonight. Ethan gave me a distracted little nod. Maybe tomorrow. The casserole sat untouched in the refrigerator for 3 days before I finally threw it away myself. Even Chloe and Tyler drifted further from me over time. Chloe was 19 now, busy with school and friends and plans for Portland. Tyler barely looked up from his tablet most days. I'd ask if they wanted to bake cookies, play checkers, watch a movie. They were always busy. Dante take it personally, Ethan told me once. Kids are different now. So I started leaving the house more often. Walking to the store even when I didn't need anything. Learning the neighbors' dogs' names. Waving at the mail carrier, just to hear another human voice. I stayed out as long as possible, without making anyone suspicious. The upstairs guest room was small, but I tried to keep it neat. I kept most of my belongings folded into a single drawer. Eventually I stopped hanging clothes in the closet altogether, because every few months Vanessa would glance inside and ask, "Do you still need all this space?" One weekend, relatives were visiting from out of town, and she asked if I'd mind staying downstairs in the basement. "Just for a few days, Mom," Ethan said. "We want the guest room looking nice." I slept beside the water heater on an air mattress. A few days later, I found one of my sweaters, shoved into a plastic storage container, damp and smelling faintly of mildew. I didn't cry, didn't argue. I kept reminding myself I wasn't paying bills, that I wasn't alone, that David would be wanted me to keep the peace. But peace costs something. And over time, I paid for it with silence. By then, most of my things fit into a single drawer upstairs. Until the garage. That was the line. The moment inconvenience became erasure. I realized I wasn't simply unwelcome in that house anymore. I was replaceable inside it. Now, sitting in the waiting room of Daniel Mercer's law office, I watched the clock move slowly past 11. Earlier that morning, I'd called and asked if someone could help me understand the process for freezing shared accounts, revoking financial access, and changing beneficiaries. A young assistant in a gray blazer greeted me politely and led me inside. The office smelled faintly like paper and lemon cleaner. She offered me tea. I declined. I just want to understand exactly what still belongs to me, I said. She nodded gently. So we went through everything line by line. I took notes inside my black leather journal. Facts only. Facts felt safer than feelings. The office printer jammed twice, while she copied the account records for me. By the time we finished, my fingertips smelled faintly like paper and ink. When we finished, the assistant looked at me carefully. Are you certain you want to move forward with all this? I met her eyes. They told me to sleep in the garage, I said quietly. That was enough. A cashier at the hardware store spoke to me, more kindly that afternoon than I'd been spoken to inside my own home in months. Cold week coming? She said while scanning the portable heater I was buying. This one's good though. Quiet, but strong. I nodded and tightened my grip on the shopping bag. I'd chosen that heater carefully. Affordable. Reliable. Strong enough to warm the corner of the garage where I already suspected I'd eventually end up sleeping. At the time, I still hadn't fully admitted to myself that my place in that house had permanently changed. A week before I left, Chloe had stopped by after class. Just the two of us in the kitchen. I made hot chocolate the old-fashioned way with milk and cinnamon on the stove. After one sip, she smiled. Nobody makes it like you do, Grandma. We sat quietly for a while before she finally said, Mom says you retired all the time now. That you actually like being alone? I looked at her carefully. She was old enough now to notice things. Old enough to avoid noticing them too. Do you think that's true? I asked. She shrugged lightly. You just don't talk much anymore. I lay awake that night thinking about all the moments I'd stayed quiet. Not when they asked me to give up my room. Not when Vanessa packed away my photographs and labeled the box extra storage. Not when I overheard them laughing with friends on the patio. Your mom still writes paper checks. Someone had joked once. And Vanessa laughed softly. Isn't it kind of adorable? They didn't silence me through cruelty. Not openly. It happened through small embarrassments. Gentle dismissals. The sort of tired patience people use when they've already decided someone belongs to another stage of life. Like I was something outdated they didn't quite know what to do with anymore. And somehow, I accepted it. Maybe because I loved Ethan. Maybe because I was afraid of becoming difficult. Or maybe because I'd spent so many years learning how to take up less space for other people's comfort. But little by little, something inside me started shifting. Not loudly. Just enough for me to feel the floor beneath my life begin to crack. The changes started small. At the grocery store, I stopped using the Mitchell family joint account card and paid in cash instead. At the bank, I began asking questions about statements I'd ignored for years. And inside the quiet corners of the Maplewood Community Library, I started drafting letters. Not emotional letters. Not angry ones either. Just clear, firm ones. One addressed to the bank. One to Daniel Mercer. One to the insurance broker. I never mailed them at first, but writing them changed something in me anyway. Every sentence made my back straighten a little more. I also started paying attention in ways I hadn't before. The way Vanessa checked emails during dinner without looking up. The way Ethan scrolled through stock updates at breakfast. Wah! Barely hearing conversations around him. The way Chloe and Tyler hardly noticed me unless I happened to be standing in front of the refrigerator. For years, I'd told myself they were simply busy. That was easier to believe. But now I saw something harder. They had built lives that functioned perfectly well without me, unless something broke or needed funding. That same week, I had an appointment with Dr. Evelyn Brooks. Routine checkup, blood pressure, arthritis, medication refills. Nothing dramatic. But halfway through the visit, she lowered her glasses slightly and looked at me more carefully. "You seem different lately," she said. "More present somehow." I smiled before I even realized I was going to. "I think I'm starting to remember who I used to be." She wrote something quietly into my chart and smiled back without asking further questions. After the appointment, I decided to walk instead of calling Ethan for a ride. The air was cold, but I liked hearing my own footsteps against the sidewalk. At a pharmacy nearby, I bought a small black journal with an elastic band around it. That night I labeled the pages. Facts. Decisions. Things they don't know I know. I wrote in it every evening after everyone went to bed. Not a record of grief. I dated every page carefully before closing the journal each night. One page read: Mortgage co-signed in 2019, primary owner, Ethan Mitchell, my name still attached to deed. Refinanced in 2023. Documents never fully reviewed by me. Another entry. Utilities still partially paid through joint account. Vanessa called it temporary. Then, Sandra retirement account accessed twice for family emergencies. Amounts never clearly explained. Halfway through the entries, I realized my handwriting had stopped shaking. I wasn't planning revenge. At that point, I wasn't even fully planning to leave. But I was preparing. And when the garage night finally happened, I was ready for it in a way I hadn't admitted to myself yet. They thought I was asleep when they left for their weekend trip. I wasn't. I heard Vanessa's voice drift down the hallway. "She'll be fine. The heater works, and honestly, she likes being by herself anyway." Neither of them checked on me before leaving, and I didn't wait for them to come back. The detached garage smelled faintly like mildew and gasoline. Paint cans sat stacked beside the folding cot. A broken step stool leaned awkwardly against the wall, like somebody had tried fixing it once and given up halfway through. There were no windows, just a single overhead bulb and the quiet hum of the small, portable heater near my feet. I sat there wearing my coat, both hands wrapped around a cup of lukewarm tea, poured into David sold green coffee mug. The mug had a tiny crack running down one side. It was one of the few things in that house that still felt undeniably mine. I'd stopped asking where everything else had gone. The baking pans, the towels, the framed wedding photo that used to sit near the hallway shelf. Things disappeared slowly in that house. Moved for space. Boxed for safekeeping. Forgotten quietly. Outside, the temperature had already fallen below freezing. I could feel it deep in my joints, the kind of ache that comes with age, and weather and years of pretending discomfort. Isn't worth mentioning. I'd had heard the front door close nearly 2 hours earlier. Then the car engine. Then Vanessa laughing as they backed down the driveway. "Don't forget your overnight bag," she called to Ethan cheerfully. "The resort has heated floors." I hadn't been invited, of course. Just a quick getaway, Ethan had explained earlier that week. "We figured you'd enjoy the peace and quiet." They never mentioned the sleeping arrangements until the last minute. Vanessa glanced up from her phone and said it casually, like she was discussing grocery lists. The guest room is taken, so you can use the garage tonight, Grandma. And honestly, I don't think she meant to hurt me. That was the part that stayed with me most. It wasn't said with anger. It was practical, efficient, thoughtless, which somehow made it worse. So there I sat in 2 sweaters and old wool socks beside a lawn mower nobody had touched in years, while the heater clicked beside me. The bulb flickered overhead every few minutes, and underneath all of it was the silence. Not empty silence. The heavy kind. The sound of realizing a life had continued moving forward without making room for you in it. After a while, I stood and walked toward the metal shelves lining the wall. Boxes marked holiday decorations and Ethan's college books were stacked near the back. I found an old blanket that smelled faintly like dust and oranges, and spread it over the cot before lying down. The metal frame creaked underneath me. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, not waiting for someone to apologize, not waiting to be rescued. I think I was waiting for myself to finally understand. I remembered the first apartment David and I shared after we got married. The heater broke during our first winter there too. We wore coats indoors, lit candles, laughed until our faces hurt, then held each other through the night while frost gathered along the windows. Back then, cold felt temporary. This felt different. There was no one beside me now. No laughter. No warm hand reaching across the bed. But there was still me. Sometime before dawn, I woke up shaking from the cold. The heater had stopped working. I pushed myself upright, knees aching, and tapped the side of it gently. Nothing. I unplugged it. Plugged it back in. For a second it flickered red and hummed to life before dying again. I stood there shivering, staring around the garage. And suddenly I saw it clearly for what it was. A storage place for things people no longer wanted nearby. Broken tools, forgotten boxes, objects with nowhere else to go. By morning, my bag was packed. I didn't leave a note. There wasn't anything left to explain. They never asked where I wanted to go. So I never told them. I walked past the flower beds I used to maintain every spring. Past the porch light I'd paid to replace. Past the side gate Ethan always said he'd fix someday. And this time, I never looked back. The bus station was nearly empty when I arrived. One man slept near the ticket machines with a suitcase balanced between his knees while the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, too bright for that hour of the morning. I stood at the counter alone until the woman behind the glass finally looked up. "Where are you headed, ma'am?" "Whichever bus leaves first," I said. She studied me for a moment. "Don't care where." I shook my head once. "There's one going toward Maplewood. You'll transfer in Riverton. That'll work." She printed the ticket and slid it toward me. "Cold morning," she said quietly. "Yes," I answered, slipping the ticket into my purse. "But I think I've already had the colder part." The ride out of town was slow. I watched familiar streets fade into stretches of frozen fields dusted silver with frost. Houses gave way to open road. The sky lightened gradually, pale and bruised with dawn. Nothing dramatic. Still, every mile felt like breathing differently. I kept thinking about what Ethan and Vanessa would come home to. Not chaos. Not accusations. Just stillness. The cot folded neatly. The heater unplugged. My drawer half empty. David's green coffee mug gone from the shelf. At first, they probably wouldn't think much of it. Vanessa would assume I'd gone to the store or out for one of my walks. Ethan might notice the garage was quiet, then move on with his morning. It would take time before concern settled in. Longer before they realized I had taken the financial folders too. The mortgage paperwork, bank statements, copies of records no one had ever bothered explaining to me properly, while I was signing them. I didn't leave to make them suffer. I left because I finally understood how invisible I allowed myself to become. At the Riverton transfer stop, I bought coffee that tasted mostly like hot water and sat alone on a metal bench with my coat pulled tight against the wind. My phone buzzed once. Ethan. I stared at his name for a few seconds before silencing the phone completely and slipping it back into my purse. There's a strange kind of calm that exists before people realize you're gone. Before the calls begin. Before anyone starts asking questions. It doesn't feel lonely. It feels open. Sitting there, I thought about being 21 years old and leaving home for the first time. David and I married that fall. We rented a tiny apartment with leaking windows and a roof that rattled during storms, but we were young enough to believe determination could solve almost anything. He built furniture from discarded wood he found behind warehouses. I worked in a school cafeteria with my sleeves rolled up in my hands, in steaming dishwater half the day. We built our life slowly, not elegantly, but honestly. And after David died 18 years ago, I kept moving because grief doesn't stop bills from arriving. I sold the old house eventually, helped Ethan whenever he needed it. Signed papers I should read more carefully, because I trusted family more than paperwork. Somewhere over the years, though, I stopped being included in the future everyone else was creating. I became something to work around. An extra room to rearrange. An expense to quietly manage. On the next bus, I opened my black leather journal again and started another list. Things that still belong to me. My name. My choices. Part ownership of the house. My savings account with a little over $62,000 still untouched. My retirement funds. And my story. That last one mattered more than I expected. By noon, I reached Maplewood. It was the kind of town people overlook unless they have a reason to stop there. Quiet sidewalks. Small storefronts. A diner with faded red booths and homemade pie advertised in the window. I ordered soup and coffee, then asked the waitress if she knew a local attorney. She pointed across the street. Second floor above the pharmacy. I went straight there. Daniel Mercer's office was modest but warm, carrying the smell of coffee and old carpet cleaner. He looked to be in his late 50s, calm-faced, patient, the sort of man who listened without interrupting. I need to make some changes, I told him after sitting down. To my accounts, my will. Maybe a few other things too. A faint smile crossed his face as he reached for a yellow legal pad. Then let's start one piece at a time. For the first time in years, someone spoke to me, like I still had authority over my own life. I told him about the mortgage I co-signed in 2019. The Mitchell family joint account, Ethan mostly controlled online. The retirement savings I'd stopped checking after David passed. And eventually, quietly, I told him about the detached garage. I explained everything plainly. No dramatics. Just facts. Daniel listened without looking surprised, which somehow unsettled me more than if he had. After a while, he leaned back slightly and said, almost under his breath, "It usually happens slowly." I looked at him. Not obvious cruelty. More like someone fading out of their own household. One small step at a time. I felt something tighten in my chest because that was exactly it. Not hatred. Not violence. Just gradual removal. By the end of the meeting, I'd assigned the first set of paperwork. Revoking Ethan's financial access. Requesting independent control over the shared accounts. Beginning the process of establishing a separate trust. Who do you want listed as beneficiary? Daniel asked. One person, I said. My granddaughter Chloe. He glanced up briefly. Not your son. I met his eyes calmly. My son's already received more from me than he realizes. After leaving the office, I wandered through town for a while before checking into a small motel nearby. Downstairs, The pharmacy had a display of wool gloves and peppermint lotion near the register. I bought both. It struck me then that I couldn't remember the last time I'd purchased something for myself without first wondering whether it would inconvenience somebody else. The motel room was simple but clean. The heater rattled loudly in the corner, but warm air still came through the vents. The woman at the front desk handed me my key, then offered me an extra blanket before I even asked. "You staying long?" she said kindly. "Just until I figure out what comes next." She smiled softly. "Well, if you need anything, let us know." I carried my tea upstairs, sat on the edge of the bed, and opened my journal again. I opened my journal again that night and started another list. Things already handled. Attorney retained. Financial authority revoked. Shared accounts flagged for restriction. Trust paperwork started. Then underneath that, I wrote, "Tomorrow. Call the bank directly. Transfer remaining funds into a private account. Draft letter to Ethan. Do not send yet. Figure out where to live." That last line sat there longer than the others. Where does a person go after realizing they no longer fit inside the life they helped build? I didn't want another large house. I didn't want revenge either. What I wanted suddenly felt very simple. Quiet mornings. My own routines. A place where my existence did to feel temporary. I started thinking about David again. Years ago, before children and mortgages and responsibility swallowed everything whole. We used to talk about buying a small place near a lake someday. He loved those kinds of dreams. Fishing at sunrise. Coffee on a dock. A porch chair that creaked properly, as he used to say. I smiled remembering how specific he'd been about it. Then, almost out of nowhere, I remembered a town name. Silver Lake. About 30 minutes from Maplewood. I wrote it down immediately. Just then, my phone lit up across the bed. 7 missed calls from Ethan. 4 from Vanessa. 1 voicemail. I didn't listen to it. Instead, I turned to a fresh page in the journal and wrote in capital letters. They always call when they need something. Because they did. When the heater stopped working. When Chloe needed tuition help. When the car insurance payment came due. When vacation costs stretched higher than expected. I had always answered. Always transferred money. Always found a way to help. Until now. Now they were returning to a house that probably felt different in ways they explain yet. Missing paperwork. Frozen access. Questions without immediate answers. And for once, I let them sit with the uncertainty instead of rescuing them from it. Not punishment. Just balance finally correcting itself. The next morning, I wore my cleanest sweater, brushed my hair carefully, and walked several blocks to the local branch office of Silver Horizon Credit Union. The building was small. 2 tellers. 1 office with frosted glass. The faint smell of printer ink and floor polish lingering in the air. The branch manager's name tag read, Karen Whitmore. She looked to be in her early 40s, with the kind of composed politeness people develop after years of handling difficult customers gracefully. I introduced myself and sat down across from her desk. "I'd like to review every account connected to my name," I said, "joint or otherwise. And I want all shared access frozen until further notice." Karen blinked once, then nodded professionally. "Of course. I'll just need identification." I handed over my license, bank card, and the folder Daniel Mercer had prepared for me the afternoon before. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't pretending not to understand my own finances. Karen invited me into her office and offered coffee. I declined. About 10 minutes later, her expression shifted slightly while looking through the records. "There's been a high volume of outgoing transfers from the joint checking account." "I know," I said quietly. "I want the account closed. We'll likely need your son's authorization for that." "No," I interrupted gently, sliding the legal paperwork toward her. "You want tea? The revocation documents have already been filed through my attorney. She opened the folder and read through the first pages carefully. I noticed the change in her expression almost immediately. More cautious, more respectful. I see, she said after a moment. Yes, we can proceed. I'd also like a separate account opened in my name only, I continued. No linked access. No shared visibility. And no automatic withdrawals connected to family expenses. Understood. An hour later, I walked out carrying a new debit card, fresh checks, and a printed history of every major transaction Ethan had made over the previous 8 months. Streaming subscriptions, utility payments, a high-end gym membership I'd never heard of, and repeated payments to something called North Ridge Property Services. I underlined that one several times. Back at the motel, wrapped in an extra blanket from the front desk, I reviewed every page slowly. They hadn't emptied my accounts. That wasn't what happened. It was smaller than that. Steadier. A slow drip over time. Just until payday. Mom. We'll pay you back. It's easier this way. Ethan used to call it simplifying things. One account for the whole family. But sitting there on that motel bed, I finally understood the truth. My phone buzzed twice with Ethan's name, while I stared at the transaction history. And I'd mistaken being useful for being valued. That afternoon, I called Daniel Mercer. They were going to come looking for me, I said. He gave a quiet little laugh. Let them. Everything is documented. Everything is legal. You're protected. I don't want a fight. You're not starting a fight, Sandra, he said calmly. You're stepping out of one. That night, with the motel heater humming softly beside the bed, I allowed myself to imagine what life might look like afterward. Not the confrontation. Not the voicemails piling up unanswered. The part after that. A small cottage near the water. A porch swing. Bookshelves filled with mystery novels and old photographs. My own dishes. My own chair. My own key. I realized I didn't want more anymore. I wanted less. Less tension. Less careful politeness. Less feeling like I had to shrink myself inside a house that partly belonged to me. I wanted coffee that stayed hot because nobody rushed me through mornings. I wanted mornings where nobody sighed when I walked into the kitchen. The next day, I decided I would call a real estate agent in Silver Lake. And I wouldn't tell anyone beforehand. Let them wonder where I went. Let them walk through the house feeling that something essential had quietly disappeared from it. The first voicemail played, by accident around 10 that night, while I was trying to set the motel alarm clock. Suddenly Ethan's voice filled the room. Small, uneasy. Mom. Hey, we just got home and your room's empty. Your stuff's gone. Just call me when you get this, okay? That was the first message. By the time I finished brushing my teeth, there were several more. Vanessa S. came next, her voice tighter than usual. Sandra, this really isn't funny. If you're upset, we can talk about it. But disappearing like this isn't helping anything. Then more from Ethan. Each one less controlled than the last. The final message ended halfway through a sentence. Mom, if something happened to you, I swear. I shut the phone off completely. Part of me wanted to answer. To reassure him. To explain that nothing terrible had happened. I had simply removed myself from a place where I no longer felt welcome. But I didn't respond. For once, I left the phone dark on the nightstand and let them sit with the quiet. I let them walk through their carefully organized house and notice what was missing. The folded quilt in the detached garage. The cleared-out drawer. The missing checkbook. The unpaid bills waiting quietly on the counter. They hadn't called Chloe yet. I knew because a little after midnight, she texted me herself. Grandma, are you okay? Dad's acting strange. What's happening? I answered Chloe first. Only Chloe. I'm okay, sweetheart. I just needed some space. I'll call you tomorrow. The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, then came back again. A second later. Another message arrived. I miss you. That one stayed with me longer than I expected. I stared at the screen for a moment before typing back. I miss you too. Then I shut the phone off again. The next morning, I walked to a small cafe near the motel and ordered pancakes with extra butter and coffee strong enough to actually taste like coffee. Nobody stared at me. Nobody asked questions. The waitress called me Han and refilled my cup before I even noticed was empty. I opened my journal. Calls from Ethan. Messages from Vanessa. Texts from Chloe. Nothing urgent. For the first time in a long while, my thoughts felt clear instead of crowded. My coffee stayed hot long enough for me to finish it. Later that afternoon, I returned to Daniel Mercer's office to sign the remaining paperwork. Chloe's educational trust was officially finalized. My remaining assets were protected, and the ownership status of the house was now under legal review for partition. They want to be able to refinance or sell the property without your approval anymore, Daniel explained. Good, I thought. Maybe now they understand what it feels like when somebody else makes decisions around you. Outside the office, I turned my phone back on briefly. A new message from Ethan appeared immediately. Mom, we need to talk. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I almost laughed at that word. Misunderstanding. That explanation had followed me for years. When I noticed my place at the table slowly disappearing. When I stopped being included in plans. When my hurt was treated like oversensitivity instead of memory. But the truth wasn't too complicated. I had the right to say no. No to being shifted around, depending on who was visiting. No to pretending I didn't notice. When I was treated like temporary furniture inside a house I helped pay for. And finally, after years of silence, I had said it. Not with yelling, with signatures. By noon, I had appointments to look at a few small rental homes near Silver Lake. Nothing fancy. 1 bedroom. Quiet streets. No stairs if possible. I wasn't searching for luxury. I was searching for somewhere I could exist without apology. The first cottage was modest but warm, carrying the smell of fresh paint and dry wood. Robert Hayes, the landlord, looked to be somewhere in his 60s, and asked almost no personal questions while showing me around. Take your time, he said, handing me the keys. The living room window was slightly crooked, but sunlight still poured through it softly. The walls were plain white, the carpet worn but clean. The kitchen barely had enough space for a kettle and cutting board. But the porch had room for a chair, and the bathroom had a deep tub that reminded me unexpectedly of the old house David and I once lived in. I stood quietly in the middle of the room and listened. No television humming from another room. No distant conversations. No careful waiting for someone else's schedule. Just quiet. It felt beautiful. I signed the lease that same afternoon. Robert didn't ask why a woman my age was renting alone, or why I could pay up front without hesitation. He simply nodded when I requested a 1-year lease with no automatic renewal. Good fences make good neighbors, he said casually. I moved in the next morning carrying 2 bags, 1 suitcase, and my black leather journal. No furniture yet. I sat on the floor drinking instant coffee from a plastic cup, while the heater rattled softly nearby. The lock worked. The heat worked. And my name was the only one on the lease. It wasn't dramatic freedom. I still had bills, medication, arthritis. But it was peace. I unlocked the door twice that night just because I could. That night, I turned my phone back on. More calls from Ethan. More carefully worded texts from Vanessa. Then, close to 10, Chloe called. This time I answered. Grandma? Her voice was cautious, almost hushed. Hi, sweetheart. Where are you? Somewhere peaceful, I said. Somewhere warm. She hesitated. Dad's kind of panicking. He mentioned lawyers and something about you taking the house away. I let the silence sit for a moment. I didn't take anything away, I said gently. I just stopped giving parts of myself away automatically. I don't really get it. I know. Another pause. Then quietly, can I come see you? That question caught me off guard more than anything else had. Yes, I said softly. Soon. Just not yet. Why? Because I needed time to remember that being alone was the same thing as being unwanted. But I kept that part to myself. I just need a little time first. Are you mad at Dad? I thought about that carefully. No, I said eventually. I think I am just tired of pretending things did hurt when they did. She went quiet again. Then, almost in a whisper, I miss your stories. I smiled before I realized I was smiling. You'll have to come here for them now. Okay. After we hung up, I watched the screen fade dark in my hand. The following morning, I finalized my new checking account at Silver Horizon Credit Union and placed Chloe's trust paperwork into a separate folder inside the safe deposit box. Everything finally had structure, protection, distance where distance was needed. On my way home, I stopped at a secondhand store and bought a kettle, a small kitchen table, and a wooden chair with a faded cushion. I carried everything back myself in 2 trips. Nobody offered help, and strangely enough, I liked the quiet effort of it. By noon, I was drinking tea in my own kitchen. No one asked what I was doing. No one lowered the thermostat behind my back. No one acted inconvenienced by my existence. My name belonged on the door now, and I had no intention of fading quietly out of my own life again. That afternoon, I was slicing apples for a pie when someone knocked. 3 firm knocks. Slow, deliberate. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and glanced toward the clock. Too late for deliveries. Too early for Robert. When I opened the door halfway, Vanessa stood there in a wool coat left unbuttoned against the cold. Her makeup was perfect. Ethan sat waiting in the running car at the curb. Can we talk? She asked carefully. I didn't move aside immediately. About what? She hesitated. Ethan didn't want to come in. He said he'd say the wrong thing. At least he knows that now, I said. Eventually, I stepped aside. Not from obligation, mostly curiosity. Vanessa walked slowly into the cottage, glancing around as if she wasn't sure whether to pity it or judge it. It's very simple, she said after a moment. It's peaceful, I answered. She nodded once. Ethan's upset, confused. About losing mortgage support, I asked, or about the gym membership payments disappearing. She blinked hard. That's unfair. No, I said calmly. It's honest. Silence settled between us. I poured myself tea and waited. I don't think all of this is necessary, she said finally. You always had a place with us. No, I interrupted softly. You assumed I'd stay no matter how uncomfortable things became. Her jaw tightened slightly. The garage thing sounded worse than it really was. We had guests. There just wasn't enough space. There was space, I said quietly. Just not for me. It wasn't personal. I looked at her for a long moment. That sentence right there is why I left. She seemed unprepared for calm certainty. Maybe she expected anger. Or tears. Something easier to dismiss. We never meant to hurt you, she said more softly. But you did. She looked down briefly. I just don't want this becoming permanent. I lifted my tea. It already was. Her eyes met mine again. You stopped seeing me as someone with boundaries, I continued. I became support. Convenience, something expected. I came here, didn't I? Yes, I said. But what matters is how people treat you when they think you'll never leave. Outside, wind rattled softly against the porch railing. You could still come back, she said quietly. We could work things out. I already adjusted, I replied. Just differently than you expected. Her gaze moved slowly around the room. The single chair, the kettle cooling on the stove, the small folding table by the window. You really don't want to come home. I looked around the cottage. I am home. Vanessa stood there another moment before stepping toward the door. Chloe. Said you wanted to see her. I do. She's worried. She'll be alright, I said softly. I think both of us will. Cold air swept inside as she opened the door. I'll tell Ethan you're safe. I always was. Then she left. No shouting, no slammed doors. Just a woman realizing she no longer had unquestioned access to something she never fully believed belonged to me. I finished the pie after she was gone. 2 days later, Chloe arrived carrying a grocery bag with both hands and wearing a nervous smile that tugged at my heart more than any voicemail Ethan had left. I brought your tea stuff, she said, lifting the bag slightly. The dried ginger kind you like. It's not strange, I told her, stepping aside. It's traditional. She laughed then. A real laugh. Warm and sudden. And for the first time in years, someone walked into my kitchen like my presence. There was the most natural thing in the world. As the days passed, the cottage stopped feeling temporary. Or maybe I stopped treating myself like someone passing through. I still woke up early out of habit. Some mornings I'd stand in the kitchen for a second before remembering I no longer had to wait for anyone else to finish using it. No careful timing, no listening for footsteps upstairs before making coffee. Just quiet. Real quiet. Not the heavy kind I used to sit inside back at Ethan's house. This was different. Softer somehow. Chloe became part of that softness without trying to. Every few days, she texted me little pieces of her life. Pictures of half-finished sketches. Songs she thought I might like. A blurry photo of rain outside her classroom window with, "This looked like your kind of weather." I never pushed for more than she offered freely. That mattered to me now. The first time she visited, she kicked off her shoes by the door and stood barefoot on the cold tile, looking around the cottage carefully. It's small, she said. Then after a second, but it feels calm here. I smiled while filling the kettle. That's because nobody here is trying to rearrange me. She looked down at that, thoughtful. While I sliced fresh ginger, she unpacked the bag she brought. Tea. And the same square tin Vanessa had packed away months earlier without asking. I had to order this online, Chloe admitted. I couldn't find it anywhere. I ran my thumb across the lid for a moment. Thank you. That seemed to embarrass her a little. Dad's not doing great with all this, she said quietly. I didn't think he would. He keeps saying the garage thing was, to what he meant. Steam curled softly from the kettle between us. Intent matters, I said. But so does what people allow themselves to become comfortable with. She didn't answer right away. Just traced her fingers slowly along the counter, while her hands shook a little. He doesn't know what to say anymore, she whispered. Honestly, neither do I. You don't need perfect words, I told her gently. You came. That was enough. We drank tea together at the folding table, while afternoon light stretched across the floorboards. She talked about classes, about Noel, about maybe applying to schools in Portland. I listened carefully, realizing how many years I'd spent hearing my family without really being invited into their inner lives anymore. At one point she asked, "Did you ever think about leaving before this?" I took a long time answering. Not leaving, I said eventually. I think I just wanted someone to notice. I wasn't really okay anymore. Chloe looked at me differently after that. Not as a grandmother. As a person. The way David used to. I'm glad you left, she said softly. And after a pause, I realized I was too. When we finished our tea, she washed the cups without asking where anything belonged. Found the towel herself. Put everything back carefully. Small things. But respectful things. Before leaving, she hugged me tightly on the porch, her forehead pressed briefly against mine, the same way she used to when she was little. "You're brave," she whispered. I almost corrected her automatically. Instead I said, "I'm just tired of disappearing inside other people's comfort." After her car disappeared down the road, I went back inside and opened my journal. Today someone came to see me just because they wanted to. Not because they needed money. Not because something broke. Just me? The cottage settled into routine slowly after that. Mornings with toast and eggs at the kitchen table, instead of standing at a counter eating quickly. Before someone else needed the space. A small radio playing jazz while I folded laundry. Tea cooling beside open windows. Sometimes I'd still catch myself lowering the television volume too quickly when footsteps passed outside before remembering none of those footsteps belonged to my family. Some mornings, I still caught myself lowering the television volume before remembering I lived alone. That realization still startled me sometimes. Ethan never came to visit. But the emails kept arriving. Long ones, carefully worded, deeply regret. Never intended. Want to make things right. Messages written late at night by someone trying to understand consequences after years of assuming love guaranteed access. I read them. I just didn't answer. Not out of cruelty, but because I was finally learning that forgiveness and immediate availability weren't the same thing. Vanessa only wrote once, short, controlled, almost corporate in tone. She called the situation an unnecessary escalation. Said she wished I'd communicated directly. I read that line twice. Because I had communicated, in pauses, in discomfort, in every strained "it's okay" that should been heard as exhaustion instead of agreement. After a while, people start treating your silence like permission. One afternoon I saw Ethan and Vanessa downtown, near the pharmacy. They didn't notice me standing across the street. Vanessa was speaking quickly, hands tense with frustration. Ethan looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. For a second, instinct told me to walk toward them. Smooth things over. Make everyone comfortable again. Instead, I stepped quietly into a side alley and let them pass. That evening Daniel Mercer called. The title review is complete, he said. Your ownership share is fully protected now. No one can refinance or borrow against the property without your approval. I thanked him. Then he hesitated. There's something else you should know. I sat down slowly with my tea. Your original co-signing paperwork from 2019 has several irregularities. Missing initials. Delayed filings. Enough that you could challenge your legal responsibility if you wanted to. I looked out the window for a long moment. Would it hurt them? Potentially. I kept staring at the steam rising from my tea, instead of answering right away, but I was tired of rescuing people from realities they helped create. Still, after a long silence, no, let it stand. You sure? Yes, I said quietly. I didn't leave to win. I left because I couldn't survive living that way anymore. After we hung up, I carried my tea onto the porch and listened to wind move through the trees. A dog barked somewhere far off. Leaves scraped softly across the gravel road. I thought about David then, about something he used to tell me whenever life became too tangled to fix. Some things, Sandy, you stop carrying. You just walk past them. That night I unpacked the final box. 3 old photo albums. My wedding ring wrapped carefully in cloth. And the blue rose quilt they left folded in the detached garage. I shook it open gently before laying it across my bed. For the first time in years, something in my life felt like it had finally returned to the right place. Then Ethan called again. I ignored the first 3 rings. But when the phone lit up a 4th time, I answered. I answered on the 4th call not because I suddenly knew what to say, but because I wanted to hear Ethan without anyone else around him. No Vanessa nearby. No distractions. Just his voice. Mom, it cracked on the first word. I am here, I said quietly. A long silence followed. I don't know what to say. Then tell the truth. I heard him exhale shakily. We never meant for things to become like that. Life got busy. Bills, schedules, everything just piled up. You saw it happening, I said softly. You just stopped thinking about what it felt like for me. He didn't argue. You left me in the detached garage. It was only one night, he said quickly. Temporary, no. The garage was only the moment that finally forced me to stop pretending everything before it was okay. Another pause. I pictured him at the kitchen table, shoulders bent forward like when he was young, and waiting for someone else to fix things for him. When I realized you were gone, I panicked, he admitted. Because of the accounts. No, he said immediately. Because you were gone. That landed harder than I expected. I thought you'd always stay, he said after a while. Even if things got uncomfortable. Even if you were unhappy. I thought you'd still be there. I know. I am sorry. It didn't repair the past. But it was honest. Late, uneven, but honest. I don't hate you, Ethan. I know. His voice caught slightly. I'm not asking you to come back. That surprised me enough that I straightened a little in the porch chair. Then why did you call? Because close, right, he said quietly. You sound different now. I looked out across the lake, while wind moved gently over the water. She wants to spend part of the summer with you, he added. I told her she could. She's welcome anytime. Another pause. Then finally. What do you want me to do? I thought carefully before answering. When someone you love goes quiet, don't automatically assume they're okay. He breathed in slowly. Okay, and then we hung up. No dramatic reconciliation. No promises about the future. Just two people finally speaking honestly. After years of talking around the truth. Afterward, I stayed on the porch wrapped in the blue rose quilt. Coffee warming my hands inside David. Chipped green mug. The same mug I carried out of the garage that night. Worn. Cracked. Still standing. A little like me. The water stayed calm that morning. Long ripples moving slowly beneath the pale light. I didn't do much that day. Rearranged a few books. Watered the herbs near the kitchen window. Wrote in my journal for a while. Nothing important by most standards. But every hour belonged entirely to me. And I was still learning how rare that feeling was. Around noon, I checked the mailbox and found a letter from Chloe. Real paper. Real handwriting. Grandma, I told Dad I'm spending part of the summer with you whether he likes it or not. He didn't argue. I think that's his version of personal growth. I'm bringing books. And those impossible puzzles you pretend to hate. You stuck with me now? I laughed quietly while reading it, then held the letter against my chest for a second before folding it carefully back up. Later that afternoon, I walked the gravel path behind the cottage toward the water. Trees swayed softly overhead, while leaves shifted in the wind. David loved that trail. Not just because it was beautiful. Because nothing there rushed you. Nothing demanded performance from you either. I sat on a weathered bench, overlooking the lake, for a long time. And somewhere in that stillness, something inside me eased loose. Not all at once. Just gradually. Like a door swollen shut from years of pressure, finally opening an inch. Back at the cottage, I opened my black leather journal one last time and wrote. What I have now. A home I chose. Room to breathe. A granddaughter who sees me clearly. A past I no longer apologize for. A name I kept. I left the journal open near the window while cool air drifted softly through the screen. Then I made tea, turned on the radio, and listened to old jazz fill the kitchen. Enough to stop mistaking endurance for love. And if you've ever had to quietly rebuild your life after realizing your silence was being mistaken, I hope this story reminded you that peace is still worth choosing. And if you're re-listening from somewhere tonight, tell me where you're re-watching from. I always enjoy reading those messages more than you probably realize. If stories like this stay with you, I hope you'll stay for the next one too.